First off, I wanted to take a moment to thank everyone so much for coming and being here today. My name is Cami Tusi. I'm a representative of the Maimonides Society here at HMS and HSDM. And I think just looking around the room and seeing so many faces and seeing so much community is quite beautiful. So thank you for taking time out of your day to be here and to hear some of the stories of our panelists and what they're living through. So to our panelists, thank you so much for your time today. Your time truly is more crucial than any of ours. So thank you very much for being willing to share some of what you're witnessing, some of the things that you're seeing as you're treating patients. And really, we appreciate you more than you know. And to everyone in the audience who has family in Israel, who has family that's currently in the conflict, I hope that everyone is safe, and my heart is with you.
Wow, I'm not sure of where to begin. First of all, thank you for having us. I think it's very important. It's very supportive. I'm sure my colleagues will agree with me to know that people like you and people around the world are really interested and want to really understand what happened. Basically, I'm a psychiatrist, so I will try to perhaps give a little bit of my experience at that day. And I think that through this experience, you might be able to understand what really, some of what happened. I'm the deputy manager of the hospital. And at that morning, it's Saturday morning, I was in my house. It's like 40 minutes from the hospital. And I woke up from a siren. And I didn't understand what was happening, because basically when there's a certain situation, like some sort of a terror attack or some sort of a military situation, we know about it like a day, 2 days, 3 days before that. We have some time to prepare ourselves, the hospitals. And this time it was in the center of the country. So I really didn't understand what was happening. And I woke up at 6:30 in the morning and I just didn't know what was happening and I couldn't receive any information. So what happened to me and to the rest of the staff, that we took our bags and we just drove to the hospital. And just to emphasize what happened during this way, I had to stop 7 times because I was under rockets and to lie on the ground. And when I reached the hospital, I couldn't get to the major building because there were so many rockets that when I went out of my car, I had to lie on the ground. And we started doing things, to prepare ourselves at about approximately, I think 9 o'clock, we started, getting some information that a lot of injured people are about to arrive to the hospital. And I was in charge of the stabilization and referral of the patients from our hospital, because it's a 650 bed hospital, and the closest one to the Gaza district. So my job actually was within the team was to make sure that the patients are stabilized before we transfer them to other hospitals, because there were so many of them. So at that day, we received over 300 injured people in a very, very short period of time. That was the first thing. And they came, they kept coming and kept coming and kept coming. And usually when you work in the ER, you see some sort of an end of things. If you had like a severe car accident or even a terrorist attack, but this one they just kept on coming and coming and coming. And I think that was a major thing, because we all worked from very early hours until very late hours and didn't even sit down, didn't have a sip of water. And it was just constant work for all the staff in the hospital. And it was, people came with multi-organ injuries with very complex injuries, and we just kept on working and working. We knew that there was no choice. You just have to work and work and work. And I think at some point in the afternoon, people were working and they were strong and they were working, but they were crying. So you could see a person from the staff crying and then continuing his work.
Thank you, Dr. Bergman. I think we have Dr. West now connected
Great.
also. Dr. West, can you also please tell us about some of your experiences? What makes this attack different from previous terrorist attacks in Israel, and what the emergency department looks like right now?
Yes, thanks for the opportunity. I was actually on call on the Black Saturday, so I was on my way into work anyway. Our shift starts at 7 o'clock. And like Dr. Bergman said, we woke up to the alarms. We realized that there was a very heavy artillery attack. But actually, already when I got to work, I had some of my workers who were already receiving footage on the social media in real time of people being murdered and people being kidnapped. And so while we were realizing we were under heavy artillery fire, already by 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning, we were beginning to realize this was much more than that. We were actually physically ourselves seeing civilians being killed and being kidnapped. And we began to realize that there's obviously been some sort of incursion on ground and into the south of Israel. And we are going to be dealing with not only the missile fire that unfortunately we are all quite used to, hitting our own town, but also all types of injuries, both civilian and security forces. And like Dr. Bergman, it went all day, mentioned it went all day. I actually have no idea when it started or when it ended. I didn't really keep an eye on the time. And whilst it was going on, we were receiving more and more patients, and they were very seriously wounded. All of them pretty much were very seriously or moderately wounded. There's very few lightly wounded people. And meanwhile, we were trying to contact our staff because a lot of our staff lives in the settlements around the south. One of my doctors was actually locked in her sealed room for 24 hours with her 1.5-year-old daughter. Her husband, who's a first responder, heard the shots around them and went out to try and save some of his neighbours. A lot of our staff actually couldn't even come in because they were trapped in their houses. So meanwhile, people were contacting friends and family in between patients coming in. It was apocalyptic. It really was. It was something like we've never experienced before, and there was this sense of uncertainty, of shock, and of also horror, because normally when patients come in and they've been injured, there's a relief when they come in. They're like, oh, thank God, now I'm in good hands. I can relax and you look after me. And the patients were coming in and saying, if all of my friends are dead, they were killing everybody around me. Let me go back. What are you doing? Why are you treating me? I want to go back. Everybody's dying. And we didn't even have time to say, what are you talking about? We just had to keep working and keep treating them. But bit by bit, we were realizing that this was a tragedy of the scale and a catastrophe of the scale that we've never seen before. And it went on all day. What was even scarier was a couple of days. It went on all day. It went on the next day. But already by Monday, there was this lull. There was this quiet. And I called up the home front and I said, where are the patients? Why aren't they coming in? And we realized that because what they were doing by Monday, Tuesday already was really sorting out the dead. One of our doctors was actually involved in 9/11, and he was there when it happened. And he was one of the people who was built up a field hospital. And he said they put together a field hospital and everybody's all, getting ready to receive the wounded. And there was this lull and none of the wounded arrived because they were all dead. And that's when it really hit us. And that's when we realized, because when you're in action and you're treating patients, you've got the adrenaline and you don't have enough time to think. But when it's 2 days later and you realize that all the people who hadn't come in by then were actually in all of these 1,400 people, or there was about 1,100 at the time that hadn't come in, are dead, then you only begin to realize the scale of things. And then the stories start coming in. And one of our doctors, 2 of his first cousins were killed, and a very close friend of mine already found out on Sunday that his daughter and his son-in-law and his 2 grandsons were killed. And the horrors and the atrocities just kept pouring in. So that was our experience then. If you'd like me to go into our experience now, I can go into it, or if you'd like to give somebody else an opportunity to speak, you can come back to me.
Thank you so much, Dr. West, for sharing. Truly, not only experiencing it, but reliving it, telling it all to us. We appreciate you. Dr. Kodish, do you think that you could please share what the hospital infrastructure looks like today, 2 weeks following the attack, and what's currently going on in Beersheba and Soroka University Medical Center?
So good morning, and again, thank you for having us. Soroka Medical Center is one of the largest medical centers in Israel, and very well trained, as are the other medical centers in the south in such events. we train constantly for mass casualty incidents, prepare for numbers. The largest mass casualty event we ever saw was about 150 injured in one day. In drills, we're expected at about 300 casualties, to say no more. That's our capacity. And Shabbat saw us at 680 by midnight and 700 by the next morning, which is far beyond anything we've ever experienced, which means a lot of our resources were drained, equipment, a lot of stuff that needs to be sterilized, the sterilization wasn't available. Staff was, in shock. We needed to regroup, rethink, restock, and get ready for what might come. And as we look forward, we realize that this is not only about wounded people coming in, it's also about our staff itself. People in all hospitals on this group saw horrible sights. We're fighting not only for casualties, but for their homes and their friends and families who live in the area. We lost Dr. Eitan Ne'eman. We lost many people, but I'll share his story. Dr. Eitan Ne'eman was, and it's extremely difficult to speak of him in past tense, a pediatric intensive care specialist who I've known for many years. And he worked with us in the trauma unit all of Shabbat morning, caring for wounded patients. The first patient he saw was a Bedouin child, a Muslim Bedouin child, 8, who was shot in his abdomen after seeing his father killed in front of his eyes. And he moved from patient to patient, helping with adults as he finished, if there was a lull where there were no pediatric patients. At around noon, he got called up for reserve service and went off to the army, where he was killed in action the next day. He will be greatly missed. Dr. Daniel Levy, a specialist in ear, nose, and throat, lived in Be'eri. In the morning, as attacks started, he put his wife and 2 young daughters in their shelter in their home and ran to the clinic to try and provide care for anyone who might be wounded. Spent the whole day there in the clinic until 2:30, when whatever guns they still had ran out of bullets. The clinic was overrun. Grenades were thrown into it, and everyone who was in the clinic died. Sort of puts into context the discussion about bombing hospitals or medical personnel, because we know Hamas terrorists had maps of every settlement and knew what a clinic was and where a clinic was. They're also clearly marked as clinics. So in the 2 weeks, we're not only healing the casualties that are still in the hospital and regrouping, we're also healing internally in a very major way. And we're preparing now for the eventuality of a ground attack, additional attacks into southern Israel, the possibility of hopefully some of the kidnapped people getting out and requiring medical care. And basically for 3 weeks, we've been rethinking every possible scenario, doing drills such as what happens if a rocket hits our internal medicine C ward. We did that last week with dummies, evacuating an entire ward because maybe a rocket hit it. And despite it being sheltered, a direct rocket hit would have effects. So reality is harsh on the ground.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kalish, for sharing. Dr. Bergman, can I ask, as a psychiatrist, how do you think that these terrorist attacks, and especially for physicians who are treating this and for the people of Israel, will shape the Israeli mentality going forward?
Well, the Israeli mentality is always shaped by, unfortunately, by tragedies. This is kind of a hypothetical question, because we can't, we are doctors. I can't, we're not prophets. But I think that I want to believe that Israelis has also resilience. So absolutely for the population of the surroundings of Gaza and the population of the south of the country, we can expect anxiety reactions. Hopefully most of them will not turn to be chronic PTSDs. But still, it's yet to be seen, because as my colleagues have emphasized, I don't think we've ever seen an attack like that in Israel. I mean, we've seen a lot of things, but this kind of tragedy and this kind of horrors, I don't think that we've ever experienced here. So we would have to follow. I would say that I think in all the hospitals and in the Barzilai Medical Center, we emphasize a lot the screening of personnel as well as patients for anxiety reactions and all sorts of trauma-related reactions on a daily basis, and we provide very good psychological as well as psychiatrical care as needed.
Thank you for sharing, and your words about resiliency, I think, definitely resonate. Dr. West, I know that Dr. Kodesh talked a little bit about the diversity of doctors and patients being treated. As an emergency medicine doctor, can you speak a little bit about the diversity and the backgrounds of the patients that you're treating that came in, and also about the diversity of the Israeli population as a whole?
Sure. So basically, as you know, a hospital is a melting pot, and everybody comes through the doors of the emergency department. So we're treating pretty much everyone. As Dr. Kodesh mentioned, this wasn't something that only targeted Jewish Israelis, it targeted all Israelis. There was Bedouin and Druze and Christian Arabs that were targeted alike, children, adults, elderly. In our hospital, we're a bit further away than both Soroka and Barzilai, and we're also a much, much smaller hospital. We saw less civilians and more security people, like policemen, policewomen, and soldiers. So I think Dr. Kodesh might be able to talk more about the diversity. But if I could connect, first of all, Dr. Eitan Neyman, the physician that was killed, the paramedic who was fighting alongside came into our hospital. He was one of the injured one who begged to go back to the front, and he was saying, "The doctor who was with me, he's dead. Dr. Eitan Neyman is dead." Now I also know Dr. Eitan Neyman, so we heard it on that moment in real time, and we're hoping that it wasn't true. So everything's very very personal. But to talk about the patients that are coming in now is also it's something that we didn't anticipate. I mean, we expected people to come in with, you know, acute stress reactions and acute stress disorders. But first of all, we're seeing so much more than that. We're seeing psychoses. We're seeing we've had two patients who came in who came in from the festival that was in Berry, but a week and a half later. Both, you know, within a couple of days of each other, totally psychotic, convinced they were still under fire, convinced we were Hamas and all the doctors and all the nurses were shooting at them, that had to be held down. We had an ultra-Orthodox woman who developed the Jerusalem syndrome, which is that she took off her wig. She's got 8 children or something, and she took off her wig, she got piercing, she dyed her head red, and she decided that this must be the time of the Messiah, and she's the Messiah because the redemption comes after a Holocaust, and this was undoubtedly a Holocaust. So as Dr. Goldman said, we are trying to, Goldberg said, sorry, we have to now develop a whole new skill set on how do we deal with all of these different forms of acute traumatic reactions. What's the right thing to say? What's the right thing to do? What's the wrong thing to say? The wrong thing to do? So whilst we've got a team of social workers and psychologists who are also helping us deal with our own stress, we have meetings twice a week, where we bring up cases, and say what should we have said, what should we have done, and we're passing around different skills. One thing I'd like to mention is that as an emergency medicine doctor, I have for years been teaching all my residents and doctors that there are 2 types of patients that can't leave their trauma behind, that the trauma is sitting at their forehead, it's sitting at their front, and the first thing they will do when they come in the emergency department, whether it's they're having an acute heart attack or they've been in a major trauma, is they will tell you about their trauma. They will say, I am a Holocaust survivor, or I'm a bereaved parent. And it's a known thing. That's what they say. It's the first thing they say. And you could only address their heart attack or their trauma after you've addressed their previous trauma, which is basically sitting at the forefront. And now we have a whole generation. We have thousands of new survivors of a very, very fresh Holocaust, which included in it every single atrocity that they managed to include over 6 years, as if there was a checklist from, well, we've beheaded children, so now let's hang up 3- and 4-year-olds in front of their parents, beat them to death and then shoot them. Let's burn children in front of the parents. Now let's shoot parents in front of their children. Let's mutilate bodies and switch their body parts. Every single one of those have done. We've got a generation of new Holocaust survivors alongside a generation of new bereaved parents. And that's going to be a huge challenge that I do not believe is going to be over in the next year or 2 years. I think it's something that we are going to have to develop the skills to deal with on a very, very long-term basis.
Thank you so much, Dr. West. Dr. Kodesh, do you think that you could please elaborate on the diversity that you're seeing and also potential staffing shortages with maybe people being called to the reserves and to fight to defend Israel?
Certainly. So first of all, Israel is indeed a very diverse society. In the south, in the Beersheba area, the southern district, the large area we cover for, about a third of the population are Muslim Bedouin. They also make up a large number of the staff in the Israeli hospitals in the south. At our medical center, it's about a sixth of the staff, about 17% of physicians. And they were targeted and attacked, certainly civilians, but also physicians and nurses and other medical personnel felt under attack as part of Israeli society during this horrible day. The first patient we operated on was a Bedouin woman, a pregnant woman at week 36, who had a gunshot injury to her abdomen. And her surgical report reads, the fetus is not breathing, but has a pulse and has a gunshot wound to the lower abdomen. It's a surgical report I'm going to keep. And this is a Bedouin woman who was shot while the people shooting her knew she was Bedouin. It wasn't a random, let's accidentally shoot someone. So they were certainly targeted as Israeli citizens, as part of our great Israeli society that is diverse and is inclusive. Regretfully, our staff from the Muslim population faces a challenge in being part of Israeli society under attack, but also being Muslims, and this attack was carried out by Muslim terrorists. And this is another issue we're dealing with, and how to prevent and allow them to continue moving forward in their life-saving mission. With us in the ED all day were Dr. Osama El Amour, Dr. Husni Al-Krinawi, Dr. Zaki Asi, several other I won't name, who were, constantly working, saving lives. This will be a challenge for the entire Israeli society because there will come a day after this war, and it might be a while out, but the society will need to heal, including all of its parts, and this will be a huge issue. Staffing, so one of the things we did Shabbat morning, per MCI protocol, we immediately started sending patients home. We sent 300 patients home that morning. By noon, patients from internal medicine, pediatrics, maternity were being sent home just to make up beds and staff available. So we currently have enough staff for what we foresee ahead, but we've taken on several volunteers from abroad in surgery, anesthesiology, critical care, emergency medicine, and so on, primarily physicians who speak Hebrew, because it's an issue and are willing to come for a certain amount of time. I think we already have our first group of volunteers on board. Rehabilitation is going to be a huge issue. Israel doesn't have resources in mental health and in rehabilitation to handle an event of this scope. Surgery, intensive care, emergency medicine are fairly short-term actions. So you're stressed, you're pulled thin, but you get over it. Mental health and rehabilitation are going to challenge us for a long time to come. And staffing will be an issue. We'll need, as a country, to plan for this better than we have so far, but on the planning department, it seems like we have our hands full in many other fronts as well.
Basically, the whole Melbourne Australian community, when I was growing up, was basically second-generation Holocaust survivors. My two aunties are the famous two aunties in the photo that everybody's aware of behind the barbed wire. They were considered to be twins and they were treated by Mengele. The reason I came to live in Israel was because I'm a second-generation Holocaust survivor. That's how I defined myself. I wanted to be in a place where I could define who I am, where I don't have to apologize for being Jewish. I don't have to deal with the preconceived ideas of people being anti-Semitic and then finding a reason to be anti-Semitic. And if, God forbid, anything happens that threatens myself, my family, then I can find back and we can look after ourselves. And we found ourselves in a Holocaust. So resilience at the moment for us is it's not about self-healing. It's not about, for me, it's not about mindfulness. It's not about physical activity. It's not about, engaging in self-care. Resilience for me is finding a sense of purpose, is finding a sense of empowerment. This is in the aftermath of such brutal attacks on our people that left us not only with a sense of abject horror and bottomless grief, but also with a sense of hopelessness. We lost faith in ourselves. How did we not see this coming? How did we once again not manage to protect ourselves, protect our children, protect each other? How do we so significantly underestimate our enemies, the depth of their cruelty and their hatred, but also their abilities to strategize? So if you want to help us, what we feel we need to do now is we need to build ourselves up again. We need to be strong again, which is why we're all engaging in activity. Dr. Bergman said it, Dr. Cordish said it. We're preparing ourselves for the next mass casualty event. I spent every spare moment training anybody who comes my way. I was up north on Thursday training the doctors in managing trauma. I trained soldiers and the military. What we're trying to do is we're trying to become strong again. Help us become strong again. Help us build ourselves up, and help us with the media, those people who want to be anti-Semitic and want to deny the atrocities and want to equate direct targeting and murder of children in the most brutal manner with anything else that's going on in the world, will continue to do so. You can't convince the convinced. What you have to try and do is convince the unconvinced, those who have not yet made up their mind and are listening to the rhetoric which is full of lies and full of falsities. And at some stage, we are going to have to, unfortunately, let these atrocities come to air, just like we had to do in the Eichmann trial. At some stage, we're going to have to put Hamas on trial, and every survivor has got to tell his story. And every person who works in Zaka, like the rabbi in my synagogue, who he has to look at the bodies and decide whether to go to the parents and tell them that you do or don't want to identify your child because they're so mutilated beyond belief, it will be so traumatic for you. This needs to come out. So we need you to support us and help us be strong. We seem to only be in favor when we're weak, but we need to be strong because we have to survive, and we need you to help us spread the word, because there's nothing more offensive than going through what we've gone through and then being told, like we were told after the Holocaust, that we made the whole thing up. Yes, that we do something that's never really worked in the past, but let's try and confuse them with the facts. They always say, don't confuse us with the facts. Let's just deal with what we're dealing with. Start confusing them with the facts. Start giving them the facts that are out there. Start telling them that this occupation that we've been talking about for the last 15 years, they've been autonomous, that we handed back Gaza Strip. The fact that Egypt didn't want to take it and they didn't want to look after themselves is not our responsibility. Tell them that the amount of money that has been poured in. Gaza Strip could have been Singapore, but the money hasn't been used to help the people. It's been used to build up the Hamas and build the underground tunnels. There is not a single house, not a single room in the whole of the Gaza Strip that has a bomb shelter. Not a single one. Why is that? Because we don't need to protect the people, because the only people we need to protect are the Hamasniks who are at the moment underneath in their tunnels being protected themselves. Tell them the facts, and I've got this fact, and I won't tell you my sources because I won't reveal them, but it will come out after the war, that the women and children have not been allowed to leave from the north of Gaza to the south. They have not been allowed to leave. They are trapped, and we have visual evidence of this, which will come out in the inquiry after this is all over, but they are not allowed to leave the hospitals. They are not allowed to leave their homes. They are kept intentionally in the place where the Hamas is hiding, so that we will kill them. They are doing this so that they will be their victims. Hamas has behaved brutally to our people, but they're behaving just as brutally to their own. They have debased Islam, which is a peaceful religion, and they have abysmally failed the Palestinian people. It's a fact. I'm no more of a politician than you are, and my opinion is really not worth any more than yours are, but these are facts. So start confusing them with facts.
I would also say something else that I think that's happening. If you think about the Holocaust, what enables us to continue to tell the story is the documentation. We're here, we're telling our stories. We've been working very hard, all of us and the staffs in the hospital. So we don't have the time to write down the stories, but I can tell a lot of stories. And I think documenting the stories of each and every family, spreading them around the world, the stories, the personal stories, that would speak to any mother. And I think, you know, you've asked me what you can do. And I know I have no idea what it is to be a Jewish person living in the States. I've always been an Israeli. I really don't know. But I would, you know, if you can be assertive, you know, tell our story, tell the stories to the world, but tell the personal stories. And we have to document these stories of each and every family. We've got to create this sort of documentation.
My family made Aliyah when I was younger. I've spent some years in the States since, and we choose to live in Israel. We choose to live in southern Israel, because even after October 7th, this is the future of the Jewish people. This is a state that needs to exist, and this is what we need to do. Someone needs to do it. And, you know, the people living in Israel, I hope on the most side, will, you know, will emerge from this with a stronger resolve of what is needed to do to keep this as, you know, the home of the Jewish people and the place where ultimately we can all live safely. And part of living here is understanding it might involve a price to pay. You know, both doctors with me and the panel live far from their hospital and drove through air raid sirens. Well, actually, Deborah said she was almost there, but rockets started going off at 6:40, so you were en route probably. And we all drove through air raid sirens, understanding a rocket might hit our car. It's what you do to preserve a democratic Jewish state in the Middle East.
I've seen the spirit of people that are surrounding me. Some of my friends are actually helping the hospital in all sorts of ways. They're all just asking, how can we be of help to you, to your children, to the staff, to the Barzilai Medical Center. And I think this is something that is really strengthening for me as well as for other people. And these are, you know, the first places that we go to have our strength, and I think that spirit is really helpful, and I think that's what actually helping us in Israel. So yes, I think your support is very important. I think people in Israel should and physicians should know that the Harvard Medical School is involved, that you're taking a stand, that you're helping with telling the stories. And, you know, notifying the world and trying to keep those people who are trying to erase everything under the radar. We simply have to be there in terms of, you know, of providing all the information to the world.
Speaking from a student perspective, I think it's very easy to feel alone, very easy to feel like much of what's being circulated is pure blatant lies, and anything that you say, you're automatically going to be, you know, placed as someone who is against human rights or who's against everything. And I think seeing so many people in the audience today come together as a community is extremely heartwarming and makes us feel like we have each other and we need to be strong together. And to our panelists, speaking as a Jew in the diaspora, I know that I'm not alone. I have no words of gratitude. I cannot even begin to imagine what it's like being there in the South, on the front lines, treating everyone. Thank you so much.